To host the 2022 FIFA World Cup, the country of Qatar spent more money than the United States spent putting men on the moon, adjusted for inflation, then doubled, $220 billion, for 1 month of football matches. For most of human history, no country had ever spent more on a single event, and by every measurement that matters, economic return, tourism gain, infrastructure legacy, Qatar lost, badly. This is not unique. For 30 years, every single country that has hosted the FIFA World Cup has lost money on it. Brazil, South Africa, Russia, Qatar, every entry on the list. As we speak, the United States, Canada, and Mexico are about to make the same mistake. They will spend at least $7 billion hosting the tournament. They will earn back, optimistically, 2 to 3. The organization running it, FIFA, will make $11 billion. This is the story of how FIFA convinced the world to keep paying. To understand what FIFA is today, you need to understand what FIFA was in 1974. In 1974, FIFA was, technically, broke. The organization that today controls the most watched sport on Earth was, for most of its history, a small Swiss federation with a few dozen employees, a modest office in Zurich, and almost no real revenue. Football was popular. FIFA was not particularly profitable. That changed when a Brazilian named João Havelange took over as president that year. Havelange's idea was radical at the time. Stop treating the World Cup like a sporting event. Start treating it like a global media property. He bundled broadcast rights into long-term, exclusive packages and sold them to networks across continents. He created tiered sponsorship structures, the kind where Coca-Cola, Adidas, and McDonald's would pay tens of millions of dollars just for the right to call themselves official partners. He turned the FIFA brand into something you could license, protect, and monetize. By the time Havelange handed off to Sepp Blatter in 1998, FIFA's annual revenue had grown more than 100-fold. In 2015, the United States Department of Justice unsealed indictments against 14 FIFA officials and associates on charges of racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering. The corruption was systemic. It went back decades. The damage to FIFA's reputation was, at the time, considered unrecoverable. In the 10 years since, FIFA's annual revenue has roughly doubled. In the 2019 to 2022 cycle, which included the controversial Qatar World Cup, FIFA generated $7.5 billion. In the 2023 to 2026 cycle that ends this summer, they're projected to clear $11 billion. About half of that money comes from broadcast rights, a third from sponsorships and marketing partnerships, the rest from licensing, hospitality packages, and ticketing. And here's the detail you should remember as we go forward. Almost none of that money is shared with the country hosting the tournament. The host country pays for the stadiums. The host country pays for the security. The host country pays for the infrastructure. And, as we're about to see, in most cases, the host country also waives the taxes FIFA would normally owe on every dollar of revenue it generates inside that country. This isn't a conspiracy, it's the deal. The question is, how did FIFA convince anyone to sign it? The mechanics of a FIFA hosting deal are public. They are written into something called the FIFA Hosting Agreement, a document every host country signs years before the tournament begins. The full agreement runs over 100 pages. The relevant sections for our purposes are these. 1. The host country provides FIFA with completely free use of the stadiums, training facilities, and any associated venues. FIFA does not pay rent. FIFA does not pay utility bills. FIFA pays nothing. 2. The host country is responsible for the security of every match, every fan zone, every training site, and every team hotel. In a typical World Cup, this involves tens of thousands of police, military, and private security personnel. The cost is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The host country pays all of it. 3. The host country is responsible for the infrastructure, roads, public transit, airport upgrades, hospital staffing, required to handle the tournament, even when most of this infrastructure isn't needed once the tournament leaves. 4. And this is the one that genuinely shocks people the first time they hear it. The host country grants FIFA, and all of FIFA's commercial partners, a complete tax exemption on all revenue generated during the tournament. Read that again. The country writing the checks also waives the taxes the recipient would normally owe. For the 2014 World Cup, this single tax exemption, applied to FIFA and roughly 40 of its commercial partners, cost the Brazilian government an estimated $250 million in foregone revenue. That number comes from Bloomberg's reporting at the time. Brazil paid FIFA to host FIFA's tournament, and then Brazil paid FIFA again by not collecting the taxes FIFA would have owed under normal circumstances. This is the part of the story that's hard to watch, because the people who protested in Brazil in 2013 weren't protesting because they hated football. Brazil loves football. They were protesting because they understood the math better than most economists. In 2013, Brazil's public schools were chronically underfunded. Public hospitals were collapsing. The country was, by any reasonable measure, in desperate need of public investment, and the Brazilian government was about to spend $15 billion hosting a one-month tournament for an organization that would, by contract, pay no taxes on any of the revenue it generated. The protests didn't stop the World Cup. They never do. But here's where it actually gets darker. There's a concept in international event hosting called the FIFA bubble. For roughly 6 weeks around the tournament, the areas immediately surrounding World Cup stadiums become, by contractual agreement with the host government, what amount to extraterritorial zones. Inside these zones, FIFA's regulations override local law in several specific domains. Commercial activity is restricted to FIFA's official partners. Local vendors are excluded. Even temporary signage put up by small businesses can be subject to confiscation. In 2014, this led to a now famous incident in Brazil, where a long-standing local vendor of a regional cherry-flavored soft drink was forcibly removed from the area around the Maracanã because Coca-Cola, FIFA's official drink partner, had purchased exclusive rights to that geographic zone. To recap, the host country pays to build the venues, provides the security, builds the infrastructure, waives the taxes, and then, for the duration of the tournament, hands over commercial control of the area immediately surrounding those venues. Venues the host country owns and paid for to FIFA's corporate partners. I am, for the record, not making any of this up. It is in the contract. So with that contract structure in mind, let's walk through what every recent host country has actually paid for the privilege of hosting the World Cup. South Africa, 2010. Total cost to host, roughly $3.8 billion. Promised by the government to South African voters, 130,000 new jobs, a permanent tourism boost, an infrastructure legacy that would transform the country. What actually happened? A short-term spike of about 300,000 foreign visitors, followed by an even sharper decline in tourism the following year. Cape Town Stadium, purpose-built for the tournament at a cost of nearly $600 million, has, in the years since, struggled to fill even a quarter of its seats for any event. It cost the city of Cape Town between $6 and $10 million per year, just to maintain. FIFA's revenue from the 2010 tournament, $3.7 billion, nearly identical to what South Africa spent, except South Africa kept the empty stadium. FIFA kept the cash. Brazil, 2014. This is where the math really starts to break. Brazil spent roughly $15 billion to host, the most ever spent on a single sporting event at that point in history. 12 stadiums were built or substantially renovated. We've already talked about the one in Manaus. Let me tell you about the others. Arena Pantanal in Cuiabá, cost $210 million, hosts no major football team, used roughly 20 times per year since the tournament ended. Estádio Mané Garrincha in Brasilia, cost $900 million, largely empty since 2014. It was, at one point, repurposed as a bus rapid transit station. Brazil's central bank conducted a detailed economic post-mortem on the 2014 World Cup, 3 years after it ended. Their conclusion: the tournament's net economic impact on Brazil was roughly zero, and possibly slightly negative once long-term stadium maintenance costs were included. FIFA's revenue from Brazil 2014, $4.8 billion. Russia, 2018. Total cost to host, approximately $11.6 billion. 11 new or rebuilt stadiums. Of those, at least 5 are in cities with no top-flight football team. They sit largely empty most weeks of the year. The Russian federal government has, since 2019, been quietly subsidizing the maintenance of these stadiums at an estimated combined cost of $70 to $100 million annually. FIFA's revenue from Russia 2018, $5.4 billion. And then, Qatar, 2022. The 2022 World Cup is, by any reasonable accounting, the most expensive sporting event in human history. The Qatari government spent somewhere north of $200 billion on World Cup-related infrastructure, 8 new stadiums, a new airport terminal, a new metro system, a new highway network, an entirely new city, called Lusail, built from scratch in the desert. FIFA's revenue from Qatar 2022, roughly $7.5 billion. For every dollar FIFA collected, Qatar spent close to $30 of its own money. There's a name for this in sports economics. It's called the hosting curse. For the host country, the World Cup is, on average, a financial loss. The only question that should follow that finding is the obvious one. Why does anyone still sign up to host it? That's where this story stops being about football and starts being about something else entirely. There are 3 reasons countries keep volunteering for this. None of them are economic. The first is prestige, and a term you've probably heard, called sports washing. The idea is straightforward. If you are an authoritarian regime, or a country with a complicated international reputation, or a government dealing with significant domestic unrest, hosting a global sporting event is a way to reset the global narrative around your country. For 35 days, every newspaper on Earth writes about your country. not your political problems, not your human rights record, your football. Qatar did not spend $200 billion on infrastructure they actually needed. They spent $200 billion on a marketing campaign, and by Qatar's own published metrics, which I would treat with some skepticism, but which are the only numbers we have, the campaign worked. The second reason is domestic political distraction. There is a reason Brazil's 2014 World Cup happened during a period of major political unrest. There is a reason Russia hosted in 2018, 4 years after annexing Crimea. There is a reason Argentina hosted in 1978, at the height of a military dictatorship that was, at that exact moment, systematically disappearing tens of thousands of its own citizens. The World Cup is, structurally, a tool for governments to consolidate national attention around a single, emotionally overwhelming story. While that story plays out, other stories, the ones the government would prefer you weren't paying attention to, quietly recede from the front page. The third reason is the simplest. It's what behavioral economists call the FOMO trap, and what psychologists call sunk cost reasoning. Every country that has ever entered a World Cup bid has been told the same thing by FIFA's consultants. This is the most prestigious sporting event on Earth. Hosting it will define a generation. The economic models that show losses are too pessimistic. The legacy will be permanent. And most importantly, this time it will be different. It is never different. So what happens in 2026? For the first time in modern World Cup history, the host countries aren't building new stadiums. The United States, Canada, and Mexico all have functioning professional sports infrastructure. MetLife Stadium, SoFi, AT&T. These were built for the NFL, not for FIFA. But FIFA gets to use them, for free, for one summer. That fact alone might break the hosting curse. It will not. Our research team ran the numbers. Here is the rough math for North America. The United States is spending an estimated $5 billion on infrastructure. Canada is spending around $600 million between Toronto and Vancouver. Mexico is spending around $2 billion across its 3 host cities. Combined host country spending, roughly $7.5 billion. Tourism revenue. According to a 2024 study from the U.S. Travel Association, the World Cup is projected to bring in roughly $2 to $3 billion in additional tourism spending across all 3 countries. The number is real. Direct match revenue going to host cities is, as we established earlier, almost zero. FIFA collects the gate. FIFA collects broadcast. FIFA collects sponsorship. What host cities get is whatever spillover spending happens in local restaurants, hotels, and bars during the week of their match. Estimated value per match, $30 to $50 million. Across 104 matches, roughly $3 to $5 billion total. Total estimated economic gain to North America, somewhere between $6 and $8 billion, generously projected. Total estimated host country expenditure, $7.5 billion, plus an additional $1 to $2 billion in security costs that are difficult to estimate precisely. Net result, roughly break even at best. A loss of $3 to $4 billion, at worst. And this is the best case version of the hosting curse. Because the United States didn't have to build stadiums, imagine if it had. FIFA's projected revenue from the 2026 tournament, $11 billion, most of it banked in Switzerland by July 20th. This is Arena da Amazônia, the stadium in the middle of the rainforest. In a few years, you'll be able to add a few more to the list. Some of the temporary venues being modified for 2026 will go back to being NFL stadiums, and that's fine. But Mexico's spending will leave behind venues that, in a few decades, may sit largely unused. The infrastructure upgrades in the US will mostly stay useful. The infrastructure upgrades in Mexico are less certain. And somewhere, in Riyadh, in Rabat, in a capital city where the bidding documents are already being drafted, there is a government reading the same numbers you just heard, studying them, filing them away. In 2030, when FIFA opens the bidding for its next World Cup, that government will raise its hand, because the hosting curse only works as long as someone keeps signing up. If you want more stories like this, subscribe. The next episode is already in production. We're going to look at what happened after the most expensive World Cup in history came to an end. The tournament ended, the cameras left, and Qatar was left with a $300 billion question. I'll see you then.